All right. Well, without further ado, let's kick it off. So, welcome everybody. My name is Corey. I'm an advisor here at the Green Municipal Fund, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Today, we're talking about thermal energy networks. Thermal energy networks are a key part of one of our funding offers called the Community Energy Systems funding offer. Uh, as you're going to learn throughout this session, thermal energy networks in Canada are a new topic. They're a complex topic, but they're not one that we need to be afraid of to approach from a municipal and local level. It's a problem we have a solution to, and we believe on this call that it has many solutions to many of the energy challenges we face in the country today. So I look forward to presenting this guide, and I just want to give a little word of thanks to all of our presenters today for joining. Um, it's been definitely a journey to produce this guide. It is, as far as we understand, a first of its kind in this depth and scale in Canada. So thank you very much to Janice and the team at BDA, also to our partners at Reshape, all excellent, and everyone else who contributed. You'll see it all published in the guide once it comes out. So just wanted to let you all know too. After this presentation, likely sometime next week, we'll be sending out the guide itself for you to dig into. So feel free to go through it and reach out to me or any of my colleagues on this call today. And we're glad to go into the details of what thermal energy networks in the municipal level look like. Next slide, please. Before kicking off, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. Um, I reflect today on the acknowledgement of the land which I live, work, and play, and it continues to serve as the traditional lands for many people for many generations. I'm joining today from Deschutes, Quebec, which is located within the traditional territory of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Iroquois Haudenosaunee peoples. They're the earliest residents of this region, and while that continues to change, while this is a virtual gathering, I think that we can all recognize the ways which First Nations and Indigenous peoples have contributed to the lands that we live on. In specific context to thermal energy networks, something that I've been learning over the past couple of years is the ways that municipalities, regions, utilities, and First Nations peoples can work together and thrive together, sharing resources across borders that both exist and don't exist. And I think that there are extraordinary ways that we can continue to work together for community energy, sharing and exploring. If you have questions about ways that your municipality could work closer with Indigenous communities near you, again, reach out to us because we have some excellent resources on the Green Municipal Fund resources page. Next slide, please. Some housekeeping. So as I mentioned, we have interpretation available for this session. You can select the globe interpretation to choose between the language of your preference, English or French. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question period for everyone to ask. So feel free to add those in as they cross your mind. We'll be able to get to them at the end and have a bit of a discussion. And there's also the chat. So feel free to use the chat however you like. I think that it's a great place for us to connect with one another, to see who's working in this space. And just generally speaking, it's good to know that there's others of us working in the space. Puis en français, il va être l'interprétation d'aujourd'hui simultanée. Tu peux choisir le globe sur ton écran. Il va être 3 présentations avec les questions-réponses à la fin. And you can choose pardon, je changeais en français. Puis tu peux choisir le Q&A, puis à la fin, switcher pour le chat pour utiliser comme tu veux. Aussi, on a trois personnes qui vont parler aujourd'hui, je peux parler en français, puis tu peux poser des questions en français ou anglais comme tu veux. Prochaine diapo. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, the Green Municipal Fund is a $2.4 billion program funded by the Government of Canada and implemented by FCM. It's a unique mix of funding and capacity building. We deliver clear environmental, economic, and social impact, creating better lives for the people in Canada. Reach out to myself and my colleagues for any questions about the Green Municipal Fund. Now to the main show. Today, we have three collaborators who I'm very proud to have been working closely with over the past year, Mathieu, Janice, and Aurélie. They played a key role in getting this guide, and they've been really leading this space across the country. So I'm super proud to be working with them all. At the end of the conversation today, we're going to have a presentation on the Community Energy Systems funding offer by my colleague Margaret. So make sure to stay tuned and get an idea of how you can apply the learnings of today's conversation later. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're going to have Mathieu Levesque, the Technologies and Alternatives Lead from the Building Decarbonization Alliance, Janice Ashworth, a Senior Consultant at Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors, and Aurélie Varin, Policy Lead, Building Decarbonization Alliance. I'll pass it right over to them right now. So Mathieu, over to you.
Thank you very much. Merci, Corey. Est-ce que tout le monde me voit ou m'entend bien?
Oui.
Perfect. Okay. By the way, I see the French slides on my screen. I'm not sure if that's okay, and I should be seeing the English
If
ones, but I'll
you
let that.
you can select at the top of the screen the tab for the English.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. I'll keep this one then. So merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, everyone, for the invitation. Ça nous fait tellement plaisir d'être ici et de voir autant de monde. I think we have 100 people on, so that's great to hear and see. And hear what FCM has been developing with us at the BDA and with Dunsky. So I'm here to set the stage really quickly by going through kind of the top line items in our Thermal Energy Networks white paper, which was released back in September, just to set the stage for the other presenters. But first, what are thermal energy networks? Click, please. In a nutshell, they come in, various shapes and forms, but at a high level, they simply are shared thermal piping infrastructure. Think gas pipes, but with hot and chilled water instead in them, and they connect multiple buildings as well as multiple thermal sources together. You might have heard various terms out there, including the legacy one, district energy, which typically refers to the centralized types of TENS that we see here. There's also this new emerging form of TENS called ambient loops or networked geothermal, which are more decentralized with hydronic heat pumps at the building level that pull or reject heat to and from this shared thermal piping infrastructure. So consider thermal energy networks, TENS, the term, as the umbrella term for any type of thermal infrastructure connecting more than one building. Okay, now onto our white paper. Next slide, please. We at the Building Decarbonization Alliance, we have two large initiatives around thermal energy networks. The first one is the one we call our TAF project, funded by TAF, of course, led by my colleague Aurélie, who's going to talk later today. The project tries to answer many questions, which I have tried to summarize here. So the first one you see led to our white paper, which I'll talk about in a minute, developed in collaboration with Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors, with, again, strong involvement from Reshape Strategies. So I'll talk about that in a minute. The third one you see below is what Janice and Aurélie will talk about today. Decision support tools, policy toolkits to support municipalities and other key stakeholders. Next slide, please. Our second project, which will appear, funded through NRCan's Office of Energy Research and Development, OERD, focuses on deep dives into two specific key players, which kept coming up as we developed our white paper, especially when we looked at what was happening in the US Northeast, where existing utilities, particularly gas ones, are deploying TENS themselves. And the second key player we're focusing on is energy regulators who can enable or simply allow stronger involvement from utilities and potentially oversee thermal energy at large. So that's our second project. Click onto our white paper. So just 3 slides to summarize the top level items in our white paper. Of course, you can go to our BDA website and have a look. So the first slide here is why the growing interest around TENS in Canada and around the globe. 4 key reasons that we heard about when we talked to stakeholders across the country. You can see them on screen. A coordinated high-impact solution that goes beyond building by building approaches, freeing up grid capacity to help electrify other sectors and other end uses, partly through leveraging use the waste heat from wastewater, from data centers, ice rink refrigeration systems. TENS are one. And of course, the transition pathway for gas utilities, which I just talked about. So definitely a pathway for gas utilities. Next slide, please. That being said, if TENS are so beneficial, what's holding them back? So here's first, it's not that TENS aren't cost effective or beneficial, but they do need more upfront capital, and they still compete against cheaper business. And worse, they're on an uneven playing field where regulated utilities can spread their costs across a large ratepayer base and amortize these costs over decades, an advantage that TEN. Think about developers who can't commit to a proposed TEN without confidence in timelines and phasing and energy bills. And TEN providers cannot secure financing without long-term costs, simply involve many more stakeholders than alternatives. Municipalities, utilities, developers, planners, and so on. And while municipalities, we think they could and probably should lack the capacity or the tools. Hence, the ones we're going to hear about later today from Aurélie and Janice. And final slide, a three-level framework. And you'll notice that the tools that Janice and Aurélie will talk about, they speak to all three. So first, we're not saying here that TENS should be fee powers to level the playing field and favor all decarbonization pathways. There are multiple reasons to act collectively, and I just wanted to mention energy security is one that is on some solutions. Second, TENS, of course, aren't a silver bullet. Their value versus alternative pathways depend on very, very local contexts. And so how do we let strategic opportunities, thermal planning, which our guides and toolkits touch on? And third and final, targeted enabling strategies to unlock the delivery at scale, which is exactly what this webinar is all about. So over to you, Janice.
Great. Thanks so much, Mathieu, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? And just get the slides up, if you don't mind. So my name is Janice Ashworth. I'm with the Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. We helped author this guidebook. I'll be speaking today about what's in the guidebook and help you determine how to use it in your municipality. So please go ahead to the next slide. So the levels of readiness for thermal energy networks to guide them through their evaluation. It's practical and applicable whether a municipality is just starting or already exploring projects. It also complements other existing resources that are out there around thermal energy networks rather than duplicating them, but puts things into the Canadian context. The framework we set up, you can see on the right here, sections. So creating the enabling conditions is one section, assessing the technical and business case for thermal energy networks is the second. And then the third one is really evaluating the ownership and governance options. And so under each one of these categories, we walk through the activities in the screening phase, the developing phase, and the executing phase. Someone's saying the screen is too large. I think that might be something FCM that you guys have to navigate. Of activities sort of run in parallel, and we help you identify which steps need to be taken at each of those phases. Next slide, please. For municipalities, the benefits of thermal energy networks are multiple. So for sure, they help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They also lower and make energy costs more stable over the long term, give more predictability. Fourth, they improve energy resilience and can help shave electrical peaks as compared to sort of a building by building solution, which is important for widespread electrification and net zero targets. And then finally, they can create local jobs and local economic development because a lot of that infrastructure design and a lot of that operational requirements are very much local. And in many cases, the fuel sources can also be local. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this next chapter of the guidebook really focuses on how municipalities can create the enabling conditions for thermal energy networks through policy direction. Next slide. Municipalities have significant influence over thermal energy network development through their authorities for planning, land use, and local approvals. So as such, in many cases, they're actually the de facto drivers of thermal energy network projects. However, the federal government and the provincial also have a role to play. So at the federal level, the most influential policies include emissions pricing, as it comes and goes, and the product efficiency standards that they also set at the federal level. Provincially, back one slide, please. Provincially, the building codes are, of course, important for both new construction and for building alterations, which is in discussion right now. The economic regulations of thermal energy utilities, which currently applies only in British Columbia. But that is an important authority of the provincial government. And also, in theory, provinces could require municipalities or utilities to develop thermal energy plans, although we haven't seen that yet done in Canada. Okay, now we can advance the slide. Planning alignment is one of the most important enabling steps for municipalities to consider. So TENS should be embedded into municipal planning frameworks from both the high level at the community plan level, like master plans, right down to the site plan level. So this will ensure that the infrastructure is considered early and integrated with other developments or other construction projects. You can see here on the right that thermal energy plans are kind of another circle there added to the planning hierarchy. And so these are really kind of these are emerging as best practices and have some overlap with various levels of plans, from the community energy plans, neighborhood plans, right down to the subdivision plans, depending on how they're structured. So that's why we put it there on top of the planning hierarchy. Next slide, please. So digging a little bit more into a thermal energy plan, we have in the guidebook a checklist for what would be included in such a plan. So first, a municipality would select a dense neighborhood and then use the thermal energy plan to assess potential anchor loads, often large public buildings or energy sources, waste heat sources or other maybe geothermal sources. It would also identify municipal land that might be useful for thermal energy infrastructure. They could align discussions with electric and gas utilities regarding their long-term plans for their own infrastructure needs. Engaging stakeholders, of course, beyond just the utilities, but the broader, development bodies and existing building owners. Aligning implementation activities with other underground work or road work planned to sort of streamline impact. And then integrating those plans into existing strategies and planning infrastructure. And then the last step is really translating the plans into policies. Okay, go ahead, advance the slide. The biggest challenge for thermal energy networks is typically what we call load or connection or first mover risk. This is really the Achilles heel of some TENS projects. And there's various ways that municipalities can reduce that risk for thermal energy network utilities that span both carrots and sticks, or a combination thereof. The most powerful tool is known as a mandatory connection bylaw. And the authority for this is typically limited to thermal energy networks that have some form of municipal ownership, at least in part. So a hybrid structure might also be able to leverage that bylaw. But fully private networks are unable to at this point, although there might be some demonstration of how that could be done in Quebec. It's being explored, but not yet possible or not yet proven. So these connection bylaws are generally applied to new development areas, and they can be lifted once the thermal energy network is established, but they can also be long-standing. So, of course, something like this would require comprehensive stakeholder engagement throughout to address concerns about cost and choice. One example that we point to in the guidebook is in Edmonton, where a mandatory connection bylaw is in place for their Blatchford community, Blatchford neighborhood. And it also has a supportive or an adjacent policy that requires that thermal energy network, which is owned and operated by the city, be cost competitive to the alternative heating sources. So this is really to protect affordability and ensure competitiveness to help get that public buy-in. Okay, advance to the next slide. Municipalities can also bake thermal energy network considerations into things like their green development standards for new buildings, building emissions performance standards for existing buildings, and/or green procurement standards for their own municipal facilities. So these policies can help drive demand for low carbon heating and make thermal energy networks more attractive and more cost competitive. Next slide. On the carrot side, so on the incentive side, financial tools are valuable for building interest and supporting the business case for thermal energy networks. Options might include investments via ownership structures, financing mechanisms extended to the infrastructure, incentives and grants, of course, development charge rebates are also possible. So with these tools, municipalities can reduce the upfront costs for the early adopters, and in some cases, earn returns on investment for their own investments in these projects. Next slide. Municipalities have other tools as well in their toolbox, including so municipalities can control access to municipal land or rights of way, public rights of way, which can make or break certain thermal energy network projects. Having access to that land in, especially in dense urban areas where thermal energy networks are typically located. Municipalities can streamline approvals or reduce fees for thermal energy networks, and they can require connection to an existing or a future thermal network when they're selling or leasing municipal property. So those are some tools that municipalities have. And then finally, the last slide here in this section, municipalities are also powerful conveners. So this is an important role that they can play to help move forward discussions around collective action projects. So thermal energy networks are really collective action challenges. And so convening of stakeholders and early and often discussions is important. So cross-sectoral working groups can be established by the municipalities and help build momentum and align stakeholders, including municipal and provincial staff, utilities, gas and electric utilities, developers, major energy users, as well as private experts, private technical experts. Next section. So this next chapter of the guidebook is focused on assessing the technical feasibility as well as the business case of thermal energy networks. Advance to the next slide, please. Before moving forward, municipalities need to understand their regulatory authorities as well as that of senior governments. So this includes utility regulatory bodies, which, as I mentioned, exist in BC, permitting authorities, land ownership and rights of way that might be necessary, who owns the land, for example, as well as any potential Indigenous considerations, if there's any treaty rights that might apply or governance structures in place. Okay, next slide. When assessing the technical feasibility for a thermal energy network, the stages include pre-feasibility and then preliminary design, business case analysis, then detailed design and construction and operation. In the guidebook, we lay out the various considerations and activities at each stage of the process, from early screening for viable sites as well, and then with the later stages focusing on things like design, financing, and implementation details. And Aurélie is going to present a couple of tools that are sort of adjunct to the guidebook that can be really helpful for municipal staff to do some of that early screening. Next slide. At this technical design phase, it's important to decide which distribution model, like a centralized or a decentralized model, as Mathieu announced at the beginning or explained at the beginning, as well as the temperature of the thermal energy that the thermal energy network will operate at. So if is it ambient or is it low temperature or steam even? We've seen in the past, that's less used now. So these decisions will influence, which are influenced by the thermal source available, the land available, and the specific needs of the anchor loads. Dovetailing these decisions with other decisions of developers, so for new construction or building upgrades in the case of existing buildings, is tricky and takes significant consultation and coordination among actors. So municipalities are well positioned to help with those sort of multi-stakeholder conversations. Next slide. Okay, this last chapter of the guidebook is digging into considerations of ownership and governance. Next slide. So ownership of thermal energy networks can really range from fully public to fully private, with hybrid options in between. The correct model depends on the local priorities, any prior experience or prior entities operating in the space, and risk tolerance, as well as the regulatory context. So lots of considerations there. Next slide, please. When the municipality is involved in the ownership structure, they have more control to align the thermal energy network with public policy goals, and as well as leverage those connection bylaws that I mentioned. As well, they might be able to tap into cheaper sources of capital. However, private ownership can offer other benefits, including expertise and reduced risk for the municipality. And then hybrid models aim to sort of balance the strengths of both, but they can also add complexity to the model. So some real pros and cons for each of these models that we outline in the guidebook, and we give some case studies of each model to show real world examples. Okay, next slide. So some of the key takeaways, municipalities are uniquely positioned to catalyze thermal energy networks. And there are three main steps that they need to follow to do so. So catalyzing, so embedding TENS into planning and policy, assessing the technical and financial feasibility of these projects, and then evaluating ownership options. And these steps are not sort of one after the other. They're really iterative and interconnected. So many of these elements need to happen in parallel and are informed by the other steps. Last slide here, please. As sort of stepping back from this particular topic, we're offering a series of webinars with the FCM for municipalities on topics of interest. So we'd like to get some of your feedback regarding which topics are of most interest for the next webinars. Got a list of options here on the screen. I think there was going to be a poll launched, right, to seek feedback. I'll just read out the options here. A detailed dive into the thermal energy network screening tools that Aurélie will present, including the decision matrix and the scorecard. B is an exploration of the funding options for climate action plans. C is how to develop thermal energy plans in more detail. And then D is business cases for different audiences for thermal energy plans, really understanding how different stakeholders benefit. And then E is any other ideas that you might want to suggest that we could consider.
There's no poll, but feel free to throw in your answers into the chat. We'll do a manual poll.
Perfect. Thanks, Corey. Okay, and that's it from me. Last slide just has my contact information. You're welcome to reach out to me and ask any questions you might have. And I look forward to the next one when we dig into topics that are also of interest to this group.
Lisiane disait A, B, C, D. Bon.
Toutes les options.
Mais
Okay.
c'est une bonne chose, tu es dans la cohorte, Lisiane. OK, ensuite, on a Aurélie. Merci, Janice.
De rien, mon plaisir.
Hi everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Merci pour l'invitation. Thank you so much for the invitation to present to today's webinar. So my name is Aurélie Vérin and I'm working as a policy lead at the Building Decarbonization Alliance. And today, actually, I'll be walking you through a set of the decision support tools that we developed under the TAP project that Mathieu mentioned earlier in his presentation. So next slide, please. Thanks. So over the next 10 minutes or so, here's what I'll cover. So first, I'll share the context behind the development of these tools and the connection with the guidebook that Janice just presented. Then I'll give you a better sense of what these tools cover, who they're designed for, and how they work. And to wrap up, I'll also highlight what's coming up next, both under the TAF project and also under the NRCan funded project that Mathieu outlined earlier, to really kind of give you an overview of upcoming activities and engagement around thermal energy networks. Next slide, please. And I have to say that I'm actually really pleased to present the resources that were developed over the past few months to equip decision makers with the knowledge and practical tools needed to enable and encourage TENS within their communities, and also helping them to address key barriers across the policy, market, and project development stages of TENS. So I also really wanted to thank Dunsky and East Coast Environmental Law for developing these resources as part of the project. And before I dive in, I kind of wanted to take a moment to put this in context and specifically why we developed these tools and how we went about it. So next slide, please. So Mathieu mentioned the white paper that we released last September, and I shared the link earlier in the chat if you want to have a look. But through that research and the conversations that we had with stakeholders, there were some key themes that emerged around where more guidance was needed. So I'll name a few. First, and actually this may be obvious, many stakeholders, including developers, told us that they still needed a clear picture of how TENS work, what the benefits are, and also what obstacles they may face. A second was a recurring question that we had also, which was where and when does a TEN make sense? So people really wanted to have more help assessing whether a location or an anchor load or energy context is well suited. The third was regarding ownership, which was also a major topic. Janice mentioned that earlier with the different structures, and there were a lot of questions around the different models, whether there is one which is more successful than another, and what are the trade-offs between public, private, or hybrid structures. Fourth was the stakeholders really asked also for more clarity around the development process itself. So the different stages from feasibility through design, construction, and operation, who's involved, what needs to happen at each step. The collaboration piece along that was also really important. So who do we need to bring to the table? How do we build an effective team to move forward with a project? And obviously another big area with lots of questions was around financing, around capital costs, cost recovery, available funding mechanisms, and so on. And I should note also that the regulatory dimension was really important there too, which is also partly why we have the other project on the side, like the NOCAD funded project that Matthew mentioned. So with that in mind, actually, we developed this toolkit, which was designed really to complement and not duplicate the TENS guidebook that Janice just presented. So essentially, these resources really actually aim to support cross-sectoral collaboration and primarily target different levels of government, as well as utilities and developers. There are also other stakeholders that may benefit from it, but they are not necessarily the primary audience for that. So next slide, please. So let me quickly walk you through these different resources and started with the Market Development Toolkit. So it includes several elements, and I'll mention a few of them here. So there is, for example, the stakeholder map, which really outlines the role of each player throughout the development stages of a TEN. So federal and provincial governments, municipalities, obviously, utilities, developers, each has a specific role and some responsibilities under the TEN process as detailed in both the white paper and the toolkit. So overall, understanding this ecosystem really helps ensure a smoother permitting, a clearer governance, and also better alignment between public and private actors. The toolkit also includes, for example, an engagement approaches section, which essentially outlines key considerations for TENS proponents when engaging with municipalities and utilities. So it helps provide some recommendations for effective collaborations during the development of a TEN. And overall, so this tool is really about highlighting the stakeholder coordination needed to move a project forward from planning to implementation. So it also supports building the business case by providing some insights on setting contracts and restructures. So essentially what makes a project bankable and attractive to partners and help start these conversations. Next slide, please. Then, so there is the policy toolkit, which focuses on the policy levers identified in our state of play report as having the most potential to create the right market conditions for TENS. So as you can see on the screen, these include mandatory clean heat plans, the National Energy Code for buildings, municipal green development standards, building emissions performance standards, and connection policies. And as you saw, like Janice mentioned a few of them already. So for each of these, the toolkit outlines the rationale and the potential impact of the policy. It also highlights the leading jurisdictions where it has already been demonstrated. It identifies the key decision makers that are responsible for implementation, while also providing some key messages that may resonate with those decision makers. Next slide, please. So the next resource is called the Municipal Policy Pathways. So it's essentially a policy brief focusing on establishing the legal and regulatory foundation for TENS. So this brief is designed to support municipal governments across Canada that aim to implement or encourage the use of thermal energy networks. So it provides an overview of the municipal authority that may be available, and also it offers some prototype policy statements and municipal bylaw language. And although I have to mention that this brief focuses on municipal authority, it really also highlights some opportunities for provincial governments to further empower municipalities in this space. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the last element I wanted to share is the scorecard, and it focuses on identifying where a TEN is actually viable. So as I mentioned earlier, it really came up repeatedly in our conversations and interviews that we had during the white paper process. And the goal here is to provide a directional and also an early stage assessment by walking the users through the necessary conditions and criteria for TENS projects. So really helping them identify what the suitable locations and foundational conditions are for a project. And it essentially covers 6 key dimensions, which are enabling legislation, TENS customer mix, heating and cooling load, the energy context associated to a project, questions around ownership, and the presence of neighbors. And each of these parameters is aiming to help to assess whether the conditions are right to move a project forward. And I really want actually to emphasize here that this tool is intended for some screening purposes. So it really will help flag potential sites for a more comprehensive study afterwards, but it doesn't aim to replace a pre-feasibility study, for example. Next slide, please. And good news is actually that all of these resources have just been posted on our website, not later than this morning. So they can be accessed through this QR code here, but also just take a look on our website, and you'll find them on the toolkit page. So for now, only the English versions are available, but the French versions are being finalized, and they will be available by mid-April. So again, feel free to take a look and also to share that with your network. Next slide, please. And let me turn now on what's coming up next. So for the TAF project, we've designed kind of a multi-layered engagement strategy, which will ensure, hopefully, that we really drive some real uptake and active engagement, and that this tool don't end up gathering dust on a shelf, essentially. So we will work on different ways to do that. So the first one being a deep engagement through some co-development of a workshop for key stakeholders who are already involved and ready to act. And the second one will be around more targeted networks. So we'll co-develop for that a train the trainer session, and we'll pursue also a few tailored smaller scale engagement with some specific organizations, those allowing us to kind of disseminate through the existing networks. The idea being, at the end of the day, really to work collaboratively with the existing networks rather than creating new ones. And for the other project on the research side, we will have some additional deep dives. So for example, we'll assess the municipal powers across key provinces to really identify where municipalities can lead and where the utilities may need to fill gaps. And we'll also look at the rules, the powers, and the barriers across provinces to better understand what enables projects to move forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I'll stop here actually. So thank you everyone, and yeah, feel free to connect with us if you want to learn more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aurélie. And now we're going to go to our Q&A just get my camera on. Now we're going to go to the Q&A section. So we have a couple of questions there, and then we're going to wrap up with a small period to discuss our funding. So feel free to add your questions in if you have them. I see that we have a few there, so if our speakers could all turn their cameras on, it would be great. Oh, yeah, Aurélie, I guess you can turn it back on. Puis, okay, so our first question is from Scott. Mathieu, tu peux répondre en français si tu veux, mais aussi en anglais, c'est comme tu veux. And for everyone in the room, for switching between languages, don't forget, you select the small globe at the bottom of the screen.
I would actually love to hear Janice and Aurélie's response first, but I can add something on what's coming, and maybe Aurélie will on that specific question from Scott McKay.
Great.
Yeah,
sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Aurélie. You probably know it in more detail.
Happy to start, actually, and then you feel free to jump in. So actually, from what we see right now, there is not like specifically a regulation regarding mandatory connection. It's like more the case when we see what's happening in BC. There are different cases with the city of Vancouver, for example, and also some specific projects, for example, with the city of Richmond, etc. For now, for example, you have the Humano project in Sherbrooke, and there is not like any mandatory connection bylaw there. So it's really like depending on the project, and it's kind of more a case-by-case situation. So, but yeah, Janice and Mathieu, feel free to add anything.
Yeah, I was going to chime in about the Montreal efforts. Mathieu, that's probably what you have in mind too. So maybe I'll just let you speak to the latest.
I was just going to say, and happy to jump in afterwards, Janice, but we're actually working on something that's coming up at the Building Decarbonization Alliance. Maybe I'll answer this one in French. Spécifiquement pour le Québec, on travaille avec la firme Kane Lamar pour un peu une cartographie des pouvoirs municipaux spécifiques au Québec pour différents types de municipalités, incluant les politiques de connexion, mais aussi toutes des questions réglementaires, des questions de financement. Donc, ça s'en vient au cours des prochains mois. Je ne peux pas promettre de date, mais tenez-vous au courant. Ça s'en vient. Go ahead, Janice.
Yeah, I think that's similar. I mean, what I've heard is that the city of Montreal is trying to get direction from the province or get approval from the province to pass on their authorities to mandate connection to a private thermal energy network. So they're exploring that with the province of Quebec, and that has yet to be decided. But I think it's worth watching for the rest of the country to see how that case study sort of develops.
Great, thank you all. And Janice, while you have your mic off, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you see it being realistic for municipalities to own and operate district heating networks similar to European cases or citizen-funded cooperative models?
Yeah, the two-part question. So the first part of that question is absolutely. There's lots of examples across the country where municipalities do own and operate, and British Columbia is the sort of hotbed for that. But there's lots of other examples in Edmonton and in many parts of the country as well. So yes. And the second part of that question is where I wanted to dive in a little bit more. Which is where, are there citizen-funded opportunities? This is an interesting one. I did just do some work on cooperative energy models for another piece of work, and this one's harder to make the case. The thermal energy networks are large infrastructure projects that take a lot of upfront capital and a fair bit of risk involved. So for citizens groups, they would certainly require collaborations with expertise to bring that to the table. I think there could be a neat overlap or opportunity for something like a housing co-op that might also have a thermal energy network as part of the development to have some sort of innovative cooperative ownership model. But we have, as far as I'm aware, have not seen that emerge in Canada yet. But I do think that the cases would be a little bit fewer and farther between for co-op ownership, just because of the complexity and the real need for municipal involvement in some way. Mind you, on the last piece here, but on the electricity side, we do see interesting collaborations between municipalities and co-op groups emerge. So perhaps, there could be a citizens group that helps with some of the financing, some of the sort of community investment model component, and then the municipality brings some of their policy expertise and public utility authority to the table.
Thank you, Janice. I see that we're at 48, so I think I know there's some great questions in the chat and we can come back to those, but before we do, I'd like to pass the mic over to my colleague Margaret, who's going to give us a quick rundown of GMF's funding for these types of projects. So if you're on this call right now and you're thinking, how do I get this funded for us? We have some options for you. So I will just make sure we get both the English and French presentations up. Thank you. And I'll pass it over to you, Margaret, and we can jump right to your slides.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Corey. My name is Margaret. I am an outreach officer here at FCM's Green Municipal Fund. And I specialize in helping you folks understand if you have projects that can get funded under FCM's Green Municipal Fund. We had some really fantastic panelists today who broke down what thermal energy networks can look like in your communities. So the question now, of course, becomes, how do I fund these projects in my community? And that is where the Community Energy System Program with FCM comes in. The Community Energy System Program funds low-carbon district heating and cooling systems, as well as renewable energy generation projects. And we fund those from the very early stages of inception, of planning, all the way through to construction. Next slide, please. So when we talk about our community energy systems, of course, we're basically talking about what this whole presentation today was about. But in terms of the types of projects that we fund, community or district energy system or thermal energy network delivers heating and cooling to multiple buildings via a centralized network plant. So if you are planning on applying for funding under FCM, we do require that more than one building is being powered by this system. The ultimate goal of this program is to enhance the reliability of your energy systems, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to integrate renewable energy sources into your municipality's energy system. Next slide, please. So now the question is, who do we fund? And essentially, there's two different ways that we fund projects. We can fund projects directly from municipal applicants, from municipal governments, or we can fund projects through non-municipal private entities. However, those have to be in partnership with municipalities. So either way, a municipality has to at least be partnered on a project. Projects should be linked directly to municipal priorities, and municipalities have to demonstrate support through financial guarantees or other legislative or policy instruments in order for a partnership with another private partner to be considered under this funding program. Next slide, please. Essentially, we have three funding streams under the Community Energy Systems offer. Two of those are for grants. The first one is for business cases, which are more preliminary. They're essentially there to help you evaluate what type of project would be best for your community. It is a grant of up to $100,000, covering standard up to 50% of project costs. However, for certain Indigenous communities, northern communities, and communities with a population under 10,000, it is possible that we could fund up to 80% of project costs, or even up to 100% of project costs if this is the community's first time applying for funding with FCM, still up to that $100,000 cap. The second funding stream we have is for feasibility studies. Feasibility studies are there to assess the technical, financial, and environmental feasibility of your project and get ready for an actual implementation. This works very similarly to business case funding, except that the cap for funding is $200,000 instead of $100,000. Still works in the same way of standard up to 50% coverage of eligible project costs, with the possibility of up to 80% or 100% coverage for smaller northern or indigenous communities. The final funding stream we have is for capital projects, for the actual implementation of your project. This is a combined grant and loan offer of up to a cap of $10 million, covering up to 80% of eligible project costs. Of the money provided by FCM for that project, 15% of that would be a grant. And I'm noticing an issue here on the slide. It's a little bit incorrect. 15% of the funding is a grant. It could go up to 20% if the project includes brownfield remediation. And then the remainder of that funding from FCM is a loan. Through FCM that is negotiated on a case-by-case basis in collaboration with our lending team. That is basically the structure of how all of our funding streams work. Next slide, please. So I have a couple of case studies here that I think I might mostly skip past because I want folks to be able to get the questions that are left answered. But I just have two here that are examples of strong projects that we have funded in the past. I have one here for a feasibility study that happened in Oakville, Ontario, for a low carbon energy solution for the Oakville Hospital project. Next slide. And then I have another one here. This was for a capital project that was funded for the rural municipality of Richot for a geothermal energy system that was funded there. If you're interested in hearing more about these projects, we'll go to the next slide and I'll talk to you about how you can move forward and discuss with FCM. So the best thing to do if you are looking to get one of your projects funded through the Community Energy System program is speaking to myself or another one of our outreach officers here with the Green Municipal Fund. I'm going to put into the chat a link to, Pascal threw a link in there for me, to our booking system where you can book a meeting at your convenience with one of our outreach officers to discuss your project, see if it is a fit with FCM, see what funding stream you belong under, and discuss the possibilities of your project. I would really like to thank everybody for learning more about the program. Thank all my fellow panelists, and if you have any questions about our funding offers, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I feel like even for those who might not be ready, we've all learned a bit more about how GMF works. So I really appreciate the way that you described it. And yeah, really click that link. Our team's great. If you have an idea in mind, just it's worth it to have a conversation to see if it could be a fit for you. This is a very interesting offer that I think applies nationally, even to small communities, and especially for northern communities. Give it a shot to speak with us. So we have 3 minutes left. I think that's enough for one more quick question. I see Janice, well, you flagged one from class. Would you like to speak to that? We've been talking a lot about ownership models.
I was actually going to...
Is that a question that could be answered in 3 minutes?
Well, I was going to pass the mic actually to Sonia to take that one because she wrote that section of the guidebook. I thought she'd do a great job.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking the same. Sonia, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. Sorry, I'm not sure which question you're referring to here.
So the question is, and just for a quick introduction, everyone, Sonia Wilson is principal with Reshape. They are national leaders in district energy systems based in Vancouver and played a key role in this guide. So thank you so much for joining us, Sonia. The question is, I believe the ownership model that appears most successful is one where the municipality maintains ownership at, say, 51% with outside financial partners for a balance of 49%. So municipal majority ownership is what class is saying.
So while that might look good on paper as the control remains with the municipality and all the financial risk is transferred, or a lot of the financial risk is transferred to a joint venture partner, it's not a model we see a lot of in Canada. The the concept of I guess a private sector partner putting up, say, almost 50% of the capital, but not having not having full control is something that we haven't seen a lot of. So there are joint venture or like public-private partnership models, but municipal ownership tends to be more, I would say, like fully public. And then there's certain types of contractual agreements between the municipality and the private sector for provision of services. And those services could range from just, like design build contracts all the way to design build, finance, operate, and maintain. So there's a lot of different flavors of the hybrid model of ownership. I don't know if that helped to answer the question.
Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, I think that's great. And we're going to go into ownership models in quite some detail of our guide. So feel free to check that out. We're going to send everybody the link. Before you go, click those 3 buttons. You're going to feel better when you click them, and we appreciate it.